And we appreciate the co-sponsorship of CWA Local 7250 today. And I want to especially thank my colleague, Bailey Ethier, who's handling the tech. We are recording this, and the recording will find its way eventually to the Eastside Freedom Library's YouTube page. And we are live streaming this to Facebook. Our plan for the tech today is we want to ask you if you're willing to leave your video on. We're still learning our way in the Zoom world, even 2 years in, and are really finding that it's kind of alienating to present to a bunch of black boxes. And so we're happy to see your mug, but we also ask you to mute your mic in case, as RJ said, you have an active toddler in the background, or as is always possible here at my house, that there may be an obstreperous dog in the background. So let's leave the mics off until we move to the discussion part of the program. And so the plan is Hector is going to present with a PowerPoint. Then I might ask him a couple of questions. We want to encourage you to either type questions into the chat or wait till we open up the floor and raise your hand and ask questions verbally. We're very excited to have this program today. It's my honor to introduce Hector Capote, who came to the United States with his family at the age of 7 in 1980 from Cuba, and has been a long-time AT&T worker and CWA member and activist, first in Miami, where he ultimately became vice president and treasurer of the Florida AFL-CIO, and also an officer in the Jobs with Justice organization in South Florida. He may be asking himself today, where the temperature is in the single digits, what is he doing in Minnesota? Maybe we will find out. Hector has also had a personality as a DJ and podcast host, mostly with music, and brings a lot to bear into our labor and social movements. So I'm going to turn the platform over to Hector, and he is going to screen share and bring us into the world of his PowerPoint. Hector.
Peter, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And it's been a really pleasure getting to know you since our local work with you on those wonderful, you guys are a great resource for labor history that I wasn't aware of in Minnesota. And I've been here since 2013. So you know what? I'm a Minnesotan. I think I've earned it. I've been long enough here where I can wear a t-shirt in the 40s, and I come from Miami. So I got my stripes. You know, one of my first experiences that kind of describes how it's all come to who I have become since I moved to Minnesota in 2013. And my first day on the job at the call center of AT&T, they were having a potluck. And the workers, I told them I'm from Miami, and everybody's interested. A guy coming from Miami, he's crazy. And they started asking me, hey, Hector, can you make some food? Why don't you bring some quesadillas, some tacos? And I'm like, I'm Cuban. We don't eat that stuff. We eat rice and beans. Our food's not even spicy. Then I started, that was the reality, that I was totally somewhere different than where I come from Cuba and from Miami. And I have been on a journey since I've been to Minnesota, and because I've missed my family, I missed my culture of trying to discover myself. something that in Miami, because there was so much of my own culture that it was overwhelming, that I was more interested in learning American culture than anything. Didn't really care about my heritage. What I want to do is I want to share with you the story of my family. And this, and it's going to give you a little bit of Cuban history so you can understand us, the Cuban people, because in Minnesota is not a lot of it. So I talked to Peter, and in the estimates I saw, there's about 5,000 of us. And it's not like we live in a section or somewhere, like in some places like LA, Tampa, Miami, or parts of New York and New Jersey. So I wanted to share with the community the story of my family, who's been, immigrants in many different generations, and share this story that has a lot of love, pain, and suffering, but I think it's quite a unique story. So I'm going to begin here. Let me share my screen. I apologize, is it sharing already, Peter? No, okay. Let me see. Okay, share screen. All right, there we go.
Yes.
All right.
Great.
Okay. So I call this El Amor, la Caña y el Mar, that if you translate it is love, sugarcane, and the sea, because I think that defines at least my family and probably a lot of Cuban families. So this is a picture of my father, and this is the only vacation he ever got to take in his life. My dad was a worker, basically never made more than $13 an hour, never had a union job, wasn't educated, but he got to go to Santo Domingo, which was the closest he ever got to Cuba, because Puerto Rico and all that section of the Caribbean, there's a lot of similarities in the way the homes are and things like that. And my dad was so happy that it's one of my favorite pictures of him. So his name is just like me, Hector Lazaro Capote. So I wanted to show you guys what makes a Cuban, because sometimes people don't understand the background of our culture. And if you look, this is my DNA results, which I don't mind sharing. And when you get these kind of results, this goes back about 6 to 8 generations. So 150 to 200 years. So the people that I'm going to introduce you today, I can trace my family maybe to 150, not pretty much 200, but this is the makeup of a Cuban. As you notice in there, there's a lot from the east part of Africa, which, totally makes sense. My family, the Capote side, comes from the Canary Islands, which is right off the coast of Africa. And, there might be some surprise. I was surprised that I had a little, indigenous Mexican. That caught me by surprise. And the rest, Wales, the British were in Havana. So maybe there or something, who knows? But that's basically give you an idea of what, so you can understand our culture. So what I've done is I built the timeline to show you, and here I'm just gonna give you some things that are important, I think, to building what I am, what my father was, my mom, my brothers, all of us, important little things that happened during time. And then, because all the things that happen around, do shape the lives of your family and your ancestors. When I came to this country, I learned American history, but with this, I realized that's not my story. I appreciate American history. American history is amazing. There's incredible stuff in there, but it's not my story. And I've spent, since I've been in Minnesota, trying to learn that story. And I told Peter, I've actually done that through books. So I'm going to share with you just some of the books that helped me understand who I am and where I come from. So, Cuba has been inhabited since 3,500 BC by the Cibones, the Taínos, and the Guanahabajates. I have a hard time pronouncing that word. But, and then in 1492, Christopher Columbus arrives in Cuba and claims the island for Spain. I would never say discover, because we were there. Definitely won't get me saying that. So in 1514, the city of Havana is established by Pamphilo. The city is named after San Cristobal de Havana, a local chief. And I found this very interesting. A census report from that year said that 40% of Spanish men and Española had Taino wives. So that explains when you look at the DNA in that why Cubans have still some Taino, even though the Spanish came close to exterminating. They didn't. I mean, people that say that Tainos and the culture is exterminated has not really researched. The music is out there. There's people that are keeping it alive. The language is in a lot of the words that we use nowadays. So in 1527, first African slaves arrived in Cuba. In 1791, one out of the 23 residents is a slave. So that's again giving you the makeup of what makes us and what's gonna make our food, all the beautiful things. And then in 1793, I put this because a lot of my family is from the east side of Cuba, and I think this had a lot of effect. Some 330,000 French refugees from a slave rebellion arrived in Cuba. So, everybody remembers that time the Haitian Revolution really shook up the Caribbean, became the first state, the first country that was, free slaves and everything. And some people went to Cuba, and that's put a lot of influence in the food and things like that, and the people who live on that side in Santiago. And in 1848, the Chinese were being contracted to build railroads and things like that, and the number increased. One thing that's really cool, if you go to Miami, especially the more Cuban parts, you go to a Chinese restaurant and you're like, oh yeah, you talk to the guy and he'll talk to you like a Cuban, like I do, because we have such a heritage of, in fact, there's one dish that I've always considered very Cuban Chinese. It's honey garlic chicken. When I left Miami, I was shocked that doesn't exist outside Miami. And I found out that it's just part of our heritage from Cuba and the Chinese and, the cuisines and things like that. So one of the big events and one of the first national heroes we had was the legend of Hautoi. And this was in 1512. And he actually was from the Dominican, and he escaped and was warning the Indians, the Tainos and Siboneyes in Cuba about the Spanish. And he fought them tooth and nail. He gave them a real hard time. But when they finally caught him, this is the famous where they were going to burn him. And they asked him to accept Jesus. And he asked the priest, are there people like you in heaven? And he says, yeah, there are many men like me in heaven. And Hautoi answered that he wanted nothing to do with a God that would allow such cruelty to unleash in his name. So this is probably our first national hero, and I'm a big fan of him. I remember as a kid, I fell in love with Tarzan when I got to his country. I used to watch the old black and white Tarzans on TV in rerun because they reminded me of him. So I made that connection as a kid in this country through Cuba's first national hero. This is a really cool book that I read that is the only story of a slave in Latin America. And it was a slave in Cuba who, after slavery, learned how to read and write. And, it's really you have to have a strong to read the horrible things that were done to him and the cruelty and things. It's, it's not for the weak of heart, just the horror as a slave, what he faced. But I think it's something that everybody should read. It's really eye-opening. So we're going now from 1850 to 1905, where you start now seeing my some of the stuff I have about my family. So in 1868 to 1878, we had the first Independence War, which is called the 10-Year War, which led to the Pack of Zion. But the thing was that the Cuban Independence War was not only about independence, also about slavery. So Cepedez, he was the one that started it, the first Independence War. He set his slaves free. But then the Pack of Zion after 10 years, and here's the thing, and you learn this through the history of Cuba, is very few doing a lot. Most stay on the sidelines. So, the Mambises, which were Cubans with machetes on horseback, facing the guns of the Spaniards, but it was all guerrilla war. It was not straight battles. They did not, traditional. No, it was guerrilla warfare. And the Spaniards had a huge fear of the machetes and things like that. But there was a Pack of Zion, and Maceo, who's one of my heroes, and Calixto Garcia did not agree because they were, we have to get rid of slavery. We can't accept the continuation of it. So they kept what was called the Little War, which was a 2-year uprising. But again, the Spaniards were able to overcome our independence heroes. So around this time, 1880, is the possible birth of my great-grandfather, Manuel Capote Leiva. That's as far as I can go back into my Capote line. And around this time, the town that he would eventually live in Cuba, Ariza, is founded in Rodas, which is in Las Villas. Later on, I'll show you a map and I'll show you some of this. So in 1886, finally, slavery is abolished in Cuba. Then one of the, most people are not even aware of this. People tend to think that in Germany, we had the first concentration camps. And no, it was actually in Cuba. This was during the Independence War from 1895 to 1898. They put in a new guy, Whaler, and he announced the policy of reconcentration. Inhabitants living outside fortified areas were given 8 days to move into towns occupied by Spanish troops. After that time, anybody caught outside the areas would be considered enemy, sympathizer, and be killed. I will share with you later through the PowerPoint some of the, because actually my great-great-grandmother has some memories of those times that she told my aunt. So in 1902, the Cuban Republic is established under the Constitution of 1901. Thomas Estrada takes office as president, but we do suffer with the Amendment Plat. Then in 1905, my grandfather, Ricardo Capote Hernandez, is born in Cienfuegos, Cuba. So this to me is one of the most beautiful paintings that I've ever seen in my life. I actually took this picture in Cuba, and this is the death of Maceo. Sadly, like when you look at Cuban history, we lost so many heroes. When you look at American history, a lot of our great heroes survived. And I think that's one of the tragedies of our country, that so many of the great men did not survive the war. And we were left with men that were, all men are imperfect, but the really standout ones just didn't make it, like Jose Martin, Maceo. But to me, this is just a powerful moment in Cuban history. So this is one of the books I've read about Maceo. It's in English. I found it very enlightening, and I became a huge fan. That when I went to Cuba, I tried to watch, go to his memorials and all the places that I knew that I could find about him. This is another great book, and this is an account of a reporter who's going along with Gomez, Maximo Gomez. And again, this is, one person accounts, not a historian going back. This is another one, but this one is in both languages, and is again another reporter with Maximo Gomez. And I love these because it's not there's great books by historians, but when it's eyewitness accounts, I think there's a little bit. And this, to me, they should make a movie about this. This is the story of a Black soldier in the war. And if you see the picture, the guy is that small. He's tiny. But his stories are amazing of the battles he was through. And it's a wonderful book. This, again, gives you an idea of Cuba. And all these books, I'm relating them to the timeline of my family. And I've read all these books also to try to understand what they were going through, what Cuba was going through. This one is a travel accounts of people from 1801 to 1899. So it's all these people giving testimonies that travel different parts of Cuba, talk to campesinos, people in the rural, not just in the cities or anything like that. So you really get a sense of the whole terrain of Cuba. I'm sorry. And then here, now there's more, historian, but it's a very good book, Cuba Between Empires, and gives you a great into that period of 1878 and 1902. It's a really, really good book. I recommend it. So this is my Otilia Perdomo. She was born, and she, around when the concentration camp started, was about 14 years old. So there it shows you the total death count in the 4 provinces, because this happened mostly in the east, like in Camagüey, Santiago. It didn't happen in Pinar del Rio, that's all the way in the right west of the country. And of course, this is when photographing is starting. So there's not like when you have, that anybody that says that the concentration camps in Germany didn't happen. It's like, oh my God, there's overwhelming evidence, personal pictures, videos, whatever you want of the horrors. Since the timeline, there's not a lot of pictures, but there are pictures, and you can see the starvation that Cubans faced. And in Santa Clara, where my family, the Capotes, are from, that's where I got the number of 69,000. That's how many people died. I don't know if anybody directly in my family suffered because of it, but Otilia's parents died young in their 20s. And again, she was born in, I had the timeline there, and I have so many names, at times don't remember exactly, but I think she was born like 1888. We'll look later in here, but again, it's one of the horror trade. And this is a picture of Whaler. He eventually left Cuba, but never paid for his crimes. If there's truly been a butcher in our country, it's that man right there. That is the essence of evil. This is a book that tells you the story of Thomas Estrada Palma, the first president of Cuba, because he actually traveled around the country to get to know the people, because he spent a lot of his time in the United States. And sometimes people don't understand this about Cuban history. So many of our patriots have lived in the United States. There's always been this, there's been, obviously, we weren't independent because America still controlled us and things, so we didn't have full independence. But, we've had this strained relationship of like where, all of our patriots have gone and lived there and been educated and come back and fight for freedom here. There's always been this back and forth United States. And in fact, if you go to New York City, they do have the town where he lived, because he was a very famous teacher there and did a lot for the town. So they have a museum. I can't remember exactly the town, but if you look at his name and you're in New York City, you'll find it's some really great history. This is the day we gained independence. I actually have this. It's a collector's thing. It's real. It's made out of silk. I researched all government flags at that time were made out of silk. And it's one of the collectible things that I have from the day of our independence. So here's my family tree. I'll be talking a lot about Manuel and the Capote side, but there's some other great interesting stories on my other sides. So this is Otilia, who was born in 1885. We talked about in the concentration camps. And this is her parents that died in their 20s. Then this is my maternal side, my grandmother. So these are my great-grandparents here and great-grandparents. And that gives you a timeline of the years they were born. Some of this stuff is exact. Some of it's been some detective work. Because, imagine going back trying to find about your family in Cuba, unless you're in Cuba. And even then, if you've ever been to the archives in Cuba, they're being in a tropical climate, they're in horrible shape. So right here, you have my great-grandfather, Manuel Capote Leiva, and his wife, Caridad. And then Ricardo Capote, my grandfather, the first one to make it to the United States, my dad, and then his mom. And then again, here, the maternal family tree, and I just blew it up so you can see some of the folks. And this is my grandfather and my grandmother and my mom right here. So this is a great story. My great-grandfather Pino and his brothers actually fought in the Independence War. And the reason they got involved is because the Spanish had killed their father. He's actually buried in the veterans' grave in Cuba. And his wife is Otilia, the one I told you about the concentration camps. I don't know who the child is in the picture. And here's a picture of the place where he was born in Havana, which is a neighborhood called Viejes and Aguate. And this is a picture from 1899, just to give you a feel of the town in that time. And one crazy thing about him was that he went on to invent a lot of things, but unfortunately he was a failed inventor. The Pinos were very poor. That part of the family were very poor, but I actually found 2 patents of inventions that he tried to create. And I copied the information. And one day I'm talking to my aunt, she shows me a picture. I was like, wow, that's what I read in the patent, that machine right there. He invented that for sugarcane. It's a sembrador to put seeds. It's not motorized, mechanical, but you're talking about the 1930s and 40s. So still in Cuba, a lot of the stuff was not mechanized and they were using ox and things like that. But he had invented a couple of things too but all of them never became rich or anything. They were extremely poor. So now I'll talk about the Capotes. So historians have said the Capotes come from the marriage of Gaspar Gonzalez Capote and Beatriz Fernandez, which I found fascinating because in my family, there's so many Fernandezes married to Capotes. I'm like, wow, this tradition's lasted since the mid-16th century. So most of the Capotes actually come from the Canary Islands, and that's in Las Palmas. Maybe some of you guys have heard Las Palmas in the news because there's actually an active volcano that it's been in a lot of international news. It's been just nonstop in the island. So the story goes that it was 6 brothers that went from Las Palmas to Cuba. Now, I'm not sure if it's Manuel or Manuel's father. There's that confusion there. But when I looked, it takes 6 weeks. If they did it in the 1880s or on that time, took like on best conditions, 6 weeks to make that trip. And that really, when I learned that story, I was like, wow, we've done this before. We're not the first. Because sometimes you think that nobody has, but in that time, there was a lot of people from the Canary Islands going to Cuba. In fact, Cuba, our language is what they speak in the Canary Islands. It's not the Spanish from Spain, it's from Canary Islands. And a lot of our traditions in food come from the Canary Islands. The Canary Islands had a huge influence. They've been sending people since the beginning of Cuba. Now, I think that my family came over for work because they were looking for a lot of people in the sugarcane, and there was a lot of sugarcane in the Canary Islands. They were also known for coffee and things like that, and tobacco. So a lot of that came from the Canary Islands, and a lot of Canarians made money or, build fincas and things like that in those industries. There's a book that I found to learn about my history in the Canary Islands. Because some people just think, oh, it's Spain. No, Canary Islands, it's its own culture. It's very different in Spain. And this goes back all the way to the first people that inhabited the islands of the Canary Islands. Here, I show you what parts my great-grandparents were from in the 1880s. So here in Aguacate, you got Andre Pino. And then in Ariza, you got my great-grandfather Manuel. And then in Camagüey. And then here you got on the maternal side, Santiago. You got my grandmother and my mom's side. So you can see we're mostly on this side of the island. And this, again, if you look at that DNA here, again, we talk about all those people coming over from Haiti, the French speaking. In fact, one of the names in my family is Gamboa, which is one of the oldest families in Cuba. I don't know if there's any relations directly, but they are one of the richest families in Cuba. Didn't translate to my family, but historians have recognized one of the first and richest families at one point in Cuba. So when they reach the Capotes, Manuel and his brothers, Cuba, they go to Ariza, but when they get there, the population is about 500, and in 1919, it's 921. So we're talking a very small town. Very small town. It's in this region, which here you have Cienfuegos. And here's a picture of him, Manuel. He's in the middle. He was known to always wear white silk suits. And there's a picture of all of his grandchildren. And I guess 2 of his sons. I don't know the names and all that because the faces, but I know that it's been confirmed to me that all of them are there, and I counted the numbers and they are. This picture, I believe, is from the 1930s. He died in 43, and I believe this picture is in the 30s. So here we have a picture, again, of Manuel Capote, and again, silk suit, well-dressed man. From what my uncle told me, he was a disciplinarian, very hard man, very family, of getting together, having dinners together, family gets together all the time. Those traditions that Cubans are known for. Now, this is the only picture I have of my great-grandmother, Caridad, which is the wife of Manuel. This picture, I believe, because she died in 1922, so I believe has to be from the 1910s. I don't know, that clothes is kind of weird looking, but it's the only picture we have of her. And unfortunately, she died in 1922 of liver disease, and she left Manuel alone with several children. And it was one of the great first tragedies in my family. And here's another picture of Manuel here on the right-hand side. Now, these are all of Manuel's children. These are my great uncles and aunts. They were all left. The last one was in 1917, and Caridad died in 1922. So this is my great-grandfather here, Ricardo. He was the second one born in 1905. Some of them I have pictures and everything, and I'll tell you some stories about them because some of them have some things that happened to them that you're affected by what the events in Cuba during the 1960s and the revolution. This is my again. I mean, he was beautiful. I gotta admit, he was a good-looking guy. I don't know if it translated well, but but this is Ricardo Capote again. An interesting fact: in 1907, Cuba had more doctors than butchers, more lawyers than civil engineers. And this picture you can tell was in Cienfuegos. So the family was still living at that time. So I believe this picture was probably taken when he was, 18 or 19. All my aunts and uncles was told to me, all of them had bachelor's degrees. They were all educated. That's one thing that my great-grandfather Manuel was about. You have to be educated. Supposedly in 1923, Ricardo, a picture of him again, came to America. I have those records. It was told to me that he went to University of Pittsburgh. I have not been able to find those records, but I know he had a bachelor's degree. I've forgotten what, but I think it's that trip in 1923 that he went to America when he went all the way to University of Pittsburgh, which to me is, I can imagine what kind of trip that must have been from Key West all the way to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania during 1923. So again, we go back to our timeline. So when Manuel Capote came to Cuba, he got involved in sugarcane and stuff like that. It's been told to my family that he became a millionaire. Now, I don't know exactly the timeline, but I've tried been looking at the economics of Cuba and do a couple of things to try to figure out. But during 1914 and 18, and it was World War I, Cuba was making a lot of money on sugar. A lot of money. It was booming. That was the time they called the vaca gordas, fat cows. And then they had the vaca flacas because Cuba was a one-crop country. And that was because since the revolution in Haiti, and Haiti was the leader in sugarcane, but then the whole revolution and burning of sugarcane fields, Cuba took over that. And, even the independence wars, they were burning sugarcane fields because that was part of the strategy to gain independence, to burn down the sugarcane fields. But Cuba became the sugar, producer of the world. So in 1922, Caridad Hernandez dies around 42 of liver disease. She leaves 7 children. And then we talk about when Ricardo goes to Key West. He also married around 1923 or 24. He had 5 children from between 1926 and 1934. At this time in Cuba, there was not a lot of television. Not a lot of television, I can tell you that, because you see some of these families get huge. Actually, genealogists have found one Cuban, and I think it was the 1600s, who there's a possibility he had between 100 to 200 children. But this person was a horrible person. He was a mayor, and a lot of it was, abusive. But that's what people have said. So in 1926, the family, after the tragedy of Caridad dying, they moved to Florida, Camagüey. That's quite a distance from Cienfuegos and Rodas and that whole area they live. It takes about 60 hours to get there if you're walking. And in fact, when they get there, Florida is a whole new town. There's all new kind of opportunity for Manuel Capote and the family, because the town is established in 1924. Now, during this time, Cuba's been going through some turbulence in politics, but this is during the Machado dictatorship, which lasts from 1925 to 1933. Machado was one of our presidents who wanted to run more than one mandate and force himself. And, there was a revolution against that, led by students. And I think that my grandfather was involved in that because later on he became the political party that was born of the 1933 revolution. I don't know what his involvement was. Nobody has that history, but just what I know later on and his age and that he was a university student and all that stuff, I'm sure he was involved in stuff. So Machado did do some things at the beginning of his term where he built our Central Highway. He built the beautiful buildings you see in the Capitol that it looks like the Congress of the United States. All that stuff was him, but he became a dictator. So there was a lot of turbulence, but, my family was in the Capotes or in Florida, with the sugarcane. And at one point, Manuel did not lost his millions. I don't know if it was in the 1914 to 18 period or what period it happened, but the family was no longer as rich as it was because of the price of sugarcane, and supposedly he had lost some kind of contract with a U.S. company. So then in 1931, they moved again to Verientes, Camagüey, which is more to the north, 7 hours away. In 1934, women gained the right to vote in Cuba. Through this time in the 30s, my grandfather Ricardo was what we call a mayoror a la finca. That means he was basically the boss of a finca. He didn't own it, but he was the guy that ran operations at the finca. So during 36 to 37, I'm going to talk about my grandfather on my mom's side who were in Spain during that time. They were the last to immigrate to Cuba out of the family, of all the families that I have. Their names were Jose Figueras and Rogelias. During that time, civil war broke out in Spain, and they wanted to escape that, so they went to Cuba. And I found this interesting. About 1,000 Cuban fighters were sent to defend Spanish democracy during that time of the Spanish Civil War. So they actually migrated to Cuba during that time. The Capotes came in the 1880s. The other families, I think, have been longer in Cuba. I don't know how long. I don't have that history, but so in 1940, our Constitution is established, and I'll talk about that later, but it's actually the most progressive, one of the most liberal constitutions, which was created by Social Democrats, which were the party that my grandfather would later become part of. So this is a great book if you want to learn about the whole Machado period, or more of the exiled. It's an immigrant story. These are the children of Machado, who one of his kids who did a book called Dancing with Dictators. And I thought it was a great book because it demystifies some things that not that his father was a dictator, but that the family was rich after they left Cuba. Some of those myths and things like that, were demystified with this book. And then there, actually, some people don't realize that Batista was president in the 1930s. And this is a book that I read about him in that period, which is totally different period in the 50s. It was a successful presidency. And one thing that I always found really interesting about this, that he actually had where he sent people to teach the campesinos how to read, and it was done through the military. And this probably sounds familiar because the Cuban Revolution later said, oh, we're doing this. Batista had done that before. And don't get this wrong about, I'm a Batista lover, but I'm just saying that in the 1930s, he was still a strongman behind the scenes through all this time period. But those 4 years, a lot of people in Cuba were actually, behind him. So what part of Cuba my grandparents were from 1905 through the 40s. Here, you have some family that were in Havana, again, in Cienfuegos. And in here, you get my Delia Pino, which is my grandmother and her family, which is from this part of Camagüey. And then again, from Mancillo, which is my grandmother. And that's, again, a different part of Cuba where there's a lot of people of Taino descent. There's a lot of Afro-Cubans. And always, something you'll notice about Cuba, all revolutions start on this side of the country. The Cuban Revolution, the independence, everything's always gone this way. This is called the hot side, Oriente, the hot part of Cuba. So here I show you a little map of how my family started over, that we came from here. We went all the way to here, Florida. After Caridad had died in the family, I imagine the tragedy of her dying at 42 and leaving 7 children must have been hard for them. And then here it shows you when they left from Florida to Verientes, and finally they would wind up in Camagüey City. So all these, I'm going to show you some stats. The towns get bigger, but here's when the family finally moves to a big city. So in Florida, when the family was there in Camagüey, that I told you, that town was established, and they went in when people were taking, it was grow businesses and things and build up a town. There was only 28,000 people there. So that's still very small. So again, Ricardo married Celia in 1923 and had 5 children. These are all my uncles that they were, 3 of them here were born in Florida, and then 2 here were born in Verientes. And here's a picture of one of the sugar mills in Verientes, Camagüey, just to give you guys an idea of those times and how things looked. And again, this was also, this is actually a sugar plantation too. And so you guys get an idea how those towns looked like at that time. So then in 1943, and this timeline goes up to 62, you get the death of my great-grandfather, Manuel Capote. And then at that time is when Dr. Grau San Martin and the Partido Revolucionario Cubano, Auténtico, wins elections in Cuba. That same year is when Ricardo's wife dies on June 9th, 1944, at age 38. So tragedy hits the family again. I don't remember exactly why she died, but again, the Capote family faces another tragedy. In 1946, again, the family had moved, and then Ricardo marries my grandmother, Delia Pino Perdomo. And in 1948, my father is born. And then 2 years later, his sister is born. And in this time, they're living in Camagüey City, in the capital. Now, in 1951, something important happened in Cuba. There was a radio show host. This guy, you could call him the Bernie Sanders of Cuba. That's what I've seen him, what I've learned about him. He was, again, a social democrat. At this time, Cuba was anti-communist. They were social democrats, the Auténtico Party, which I mentioned before, that my grandfather it joins at this time because he gets involved in politics. This is all the generation right now that kicked out Machado in 1933. Right now, they're all getting into the politics and create this social democrat party, very progressive. The 1940 Constitution, the labor laws and the equality laws, like none never seen. So Chiba's, one problem that the party Auténtico faced was corruption. So Chibas went against the party and created his own party, Ortodoxo, and he was always on the radio and talking about, he's going to clean up the politics. He was very popular, but he actually, by mistake, people say, committed suicide live on the radio. He shot himself in the stomach, and people say he did it to get attention because he was going to make a big reveal, but somebody promised him something that didn't happen. He didn't want to look like a liar because he says, we got them. This guy tells me he has the goods. People think he was set up so that he would look like, he's not giving correct news. And so he shot himself in his stomach, but he did it in a way that he died. He wasn't the type of guy to use guns and stuff. So that was a big, big moment in 1951. That I had to put in there. And later on, I'll show you one of the books I read about him, because I was a big fan of him, and he was anti-communist. Again, communism was not, the Communist Party existed. And then you'll see that, at some points, some political party made an alliance with them, but they were always a minority, especially in the 40s. Cuba even sent troops to other countries to fight communists, which some people can phantom that nowadays. So, then in 1952 is the big date where Batista does his coup d'etat and does a military dictatorship, seizes power. It is like nobody puts up a fight, really, honestly. And we'll talk some of the events between here, but it's just giving you some little timelines. 1959, Batista resigns, flees the country. Fidel Castro enters Santiago de Cuba. My family, my grandmother's living there at that time. So my grandmother has pictures of that. My grandma has pictures of her and Camilo and all that in the crowd during that time. Raul Castro starts executions of military, various rebels associated with the Directorio. They seize Havana. So people kind of think that Castro was the only group that was fighting Batista, but there was many other groups involved in that. And Directorio was a group that was in Havana. It was mostly made of university students. In 1960, Huber Matos becomes governor of the province of Camagüey. Huber Matos was one of the original comandantes de los Fidel. I'm in the middle of reading up his book. He later was jailed for 20 years because he was an anti-communist. And when he saw things were turning communist, he was one of the many that spoke out. And in fact, many of you don't know the story. It was one of his best friends, Camilo, who came to arrest him and said, I don't want to do this. I don't like this. Is not going right, but I have to. And then later on, a couple of days later, Camilo, in a mysterious airplane accident, dies. So I put his name out there because my family were huge proponents of Huber Matos because he was big in Camagüey. He was very popular. And in that time, if you were a very popular person like Camilo or Huber Matos, you can't overshadow the big guy. You can't. There's no room in the stage, for the big guy. And then during that time was Operation Peter Pan, which I'll talk about later. Now, it's just something here that I found fascinating. The first 2 years of revolution, Cuba lost more than 50% of its doctors and teachers. Sometimes people like to say that, the millionaires left. No, there was doctors and teachers, and teachers are not millionaires. Doctors, yeah, at least in this country, but teachers are not millionaires. So 1961, my dad was involved in this, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. The National Literacy Campaign in Cuba, which my father joined at age 13 in 1961. And I'll talk about the conflicts in the family because we had communists, anti-communists in my family. We had them all. And then also in 61, the Bay of Pigs happened, which to me, the emphasis I put, it was Cuban exiles that went back to their country. It was not American soldiers, it was Cuban exiles. Whether I agree with the whole thing or not, it was Cuban exiles. And then in 62, we had the whole President Kennedy, and we had the whole thing with the missile crisis, which maybe some people here have lived through, because I can imagine what that was like. And in a bigger event that led to the second wave of my family leaving Cuba was the United States exchanges $53 million of medicine and baby food for 1,100 exiles captured in Bay of Pigs. But the thing is, several families escaped. So I'll tell you the story later, but one of my families escaped that way. There was many ways my family escaped Cuba during this time. A lot of different, it was crazy. All right. So again, here, just to remind you, Ricardo and Delia, my grandparents. She was born in 1910, very poor family. And there's my dad and his sister, their kids. So Camagüey City, and this is very telling of Camagüey. This is called Tijon. They store water in here, and you see this all through Camagüey. That's part of the culture. So it's a very important image. So the family moves in 1948 to there, and it's the last stand that our family takes. At that time, the population in the city in 1953 is 100,000 people. So as you see, the towns get bigger where the family moves to. And let's see here. This is a book that I wanted to, that I wanted to share with you that showed me a lot about the unions, especially those that are big labor activists. It's the history of organized labor. This is a professor from University of South Florida, which actually is like in the west coast of Florida. But I found it amazing. It's called The History of Organized Labor in Cuba. And, you know, of course, there's politics in there because there's always politics. But I found it a fascinating book about the labor history of a country. It's actually the first book I ever read about Cuba. And of course, being a labor activist, you always, that's the road that always leads you there. This is something I wanted to share. This is the button from the telephone workers. I'm a telephone worker. This is the name of their union. And a quick story. My union, Communication Workers of America, actually helped the telephone workers escape when the revolution came in and started turning communist, and they started going after union activists. The telephone workers are one of the most anti-communist. I think also the electrical workers. And these are unions that would sabotage Batista, because the telephone workers and the electrical workers were sabotaging all the time the Batista regime. But once they saw that the communists were coming in, they turned, but then the labor leaders were kicked out. So CWA helped a lot of them escape. And that has given me a sense of pride in my union. I want to research more, because there's this story, it hasn't been fully told by our union. So I look forward to one day researching it. So I told you about Social Democrats. This is the political party that my grandfather, Ricardo Capote, belonged to. And I consider myself part of this party. They were a nationalist party. Cuba has always been a very nationalist country. You know, their theme was para los cubanos, because the thing that would happen during the 30s was there was always a preference for Spaniards to get jobs, not Cubans. So they were a lot about that, you know, all the jobs should come to our country. And then these are some of the memorabilia that I've collected from them. But again, they were anti-communist social democrats, very progressive, pro-union, pro-equality. And they're the ones that were in the presidency from 1940 to Batista did the military seizing of the country. They were going to have elections. Batista was going to lose by a lot. Now, this party, the Authentico party, had lost popularity. A lot of corruption, unfortunately. And they did not put, a lot of the things in the Constitution were not implemented. They were written, but not implemented. So Cuba faced a lot of challenge. Cuba has not been an easy place politically, you know, but I always want to drive the emphasis. We were always, we not want communism. So here's some of the stuff that I have from him from that time, from Ricardo Capote of him. He was a commissioner in Camagüey. And there's some of the political pamphlets that he had. As you can see the symbols of the political party. You can see, you know, the number. I don't know how you voted or anything, but then, and it tells you the number of who's running for mayor or Roberto. Really fascinating stuff. I'm really grateful that I have these memories of him. These are some of the books that I recommend to explain the political things that were going on at that time. So if you want to learn about, like, I want to learn about my grandfather's political party. So I read this book, The Cuban Democratic Experience, The Authentico Years from 1944 to 52. This explains you the whole goings on of those two presidency and the political party. And it gave me, for the first time, and like the things that without ever meeting him, because I never got to meet him. He died in 73, the year I was born. So, and, you know, he died in the United States. I was born in Cuba. So this gave me into his political leanings, his ideals. And I was like, holy cow, they're exactly like mine. It's like, I've always believed in these things, free healthcare, you know, all the things that he believes in. I'm like, it's amazing, the DNA and family traditions. And then the middle book is the one I told you about, Eduardo Chivas, and talks about, you know, him. He used to be part of this party, the Authentico's, and all the way to his last days. And again, this was another great book that tells you about the events that led to the coup in 1952. It gives into details of what happened, those days that led to Batista taking over. And, you know, some people went to the streets, but it wasn't a lot. Because again, in Cuba, the weird thing is we've always stood to the side and let others do the fighting, you know, that not a lot stand up. The Mambisas were like in the 20,000, 30,000s. That's as big as their like army ever got, you know, even though they were feared. This is my my uncle, one of Ricardo's sons. Again, his same name, Ricardo Capote. And he was part of the July 26th movement because my family was against Batista. All Cubans. I mean, there was so few that supported him. So he did a lot of stuff along with my other uncles to sabotage Batista. You know, I've heard crazy stories of one of my uncles machine gun under the bed in the times of Batista. You know, and here's of him because he was involved in the unions, in the railroad workers. He was a labor activist after the revolution. And here's him giving a speech on the radio in Camagüey after the revolution. I have pictures of him and Fidel and with Che and all that stuff. He later was the head of the CDRs, and we'll talk about that later. Here's some more books to give you an idea of those times that I've read. Some of these are very famous by the people aware of. Back Channel to Cuba, the history of negotiations. So you can see that they've always been talking to each other. And then here there's some books. They're by the ambassadors, American ambassadors. That during that time when Cuba was democratic, had a lot of power. Some people say all the power, but definitely had a lot of power. When 90 miles away and all that stuff. So here's some books, The Close of Enemies. These books are very insightful, especially during the days that were leading to the revolution, what the ambassadors were doing, the State Department, all these places in the United States. Oops. Okay, so the first one to get out after the revolution was my uncle, George Capote. He escaped through Guantanamo. During that time, they actually had planted 8 miles of cactus. So Cubans wouldn't go to Guantanamo because at that time you had Cubans that were working there. They were still going back and forth. The story is that he went to Camagüey to say goodbye to the family. I think it was around 1961. They also had started the United States first put mines, then Cuba did. We started the whole thing with the mines. We've taken those mines off since then. Cuba has kept theirs, but we took them off in the 90s. But that he snuck in there, crossing a fence. And then at that time, they weren't leaving. They weren't letting Cubans go to the United States because they go, well, this thing's going to last a little bit. You'll go back to Cuba. So my uncle, George Capote, tried to escape through a boat 5 times, and they kept sending him back. Until finally he got in a car and he snuck into the United States and went to New York. So he actually snuck after he worked for about a year or two in Guantanamo, supporting the family in Cuba during the 60s after the revolution with the money that he was making in Guantanamo, but he was trying to escape so then he can get the rest of the family out. He was the first one that got out in the 60s in the family. And then later on, he's the one that brought us to the United States, my uncle. So it's just to give you guys an idea of the massive exodus that Cuba has seen since the Cuban Revolution. I think these numbers are startling, and it breaks it down. It starts 1870 to 2825. And right there, you have the historical exiles, which are 59 to 62. So there you get some people, like the Pedro Pan, which we'll talk a little bit later. The freedom flights, which some of my family left on that, Mariel, that we did. Then you get the rafters, Balseros in the 90s and during the special periods and when the Soviet Union collapsed. But you can see just how many people are leaving the country. And I sort of tell people, if communism was so good, you'd be getting an influx, not a decrease of people wanting to get out, I know that it's not as simple as that. There's a lot of factors that people are going to throw out, but to me, this is very startling how many of us have been wanting to get out. Pedro Pan, my family was involved in it, but this is a very, one of the things I think that was the ugliest things about communism is the separation of families. When I saw through Trump, all the things happening at the border with separation of families, I cried a lot. That's the time when here I started going to a psychologist to get some help dealing with what I've never dealt with all my life is this whole trip that I made from Cuba and when I got here as an immigrant. And Pedro Pan was when Cuban parents were sending their children to United States, mostly by themselves, so kids wouldn't be indoctrinated. Now, if you look up there, you'll see that children were sent actually to Duluth. There's several cities. And where did I get this? In Miami, there's a museum called Miami Dysphoria Museum. They've done different exhibits. They've been doing an exhibit for about a year and a half on Pedro Pan, and it's part of their exhibit and their records. So kids are actually sent to Minnesota. I don't know what those people are now, but I think they must have fascinating stories. So between 1960 and 62, over 14,000 children were sent out of Cuba. And, you know, indoctrination did happen because, as I tell you the story of my father, I consider it happened to him indoctrination, totally. My father is the story of just being indoctrinated and being blindfolded totally. One thing that really horrified me at this story is where you see the picture in the middle, that's a replica of what they call the glass bowl. Because when parents would get to the airport, they were separated from their children and they were put in a glass bowl like this, and they couldn't touch, I mean, just by the mirror. And they kept them there for 5 to 8 hours, sometimes without food or water, just to be cruel to the children in Pedro Pan. I didn't know that story, and I found this so cruel. And that's when you start seeing the destruction of families in Cuba, where the regime, you know, wants to control your children, wants to tell them what to think, wants to make those children suspicious of the parents because they're not revolutionaries. They don't believe enough. This is when people start becoming suspicious of each other. And our society completely changes from society of you love your neighbor, you give them, you know, a rice of this, you help them, you know, that thing that Cuba always had through all those times that I showed you, all that starts disappearing. My father was part of the literacy program because my father was a huge believer in communism. He was 13 years old during the revolution. This is a book that I bought that actually is made in Cuba, that it tells you the whole story. The one in the middle is the little flag that he would carry. And this is the little medal they gave him for teaching the people in the countryside how to read. So the story is that everybody in my family supported the revolution. Nobody was against it. Everybody, some people even took action, did revolutionary, not in the mountains, but in the cities and Camagüey and all those things. So when it happened and things started quickly changing and the truth started coming out, and there's more details in the presentation that I have and stuff, but started changing. My father was 13. And, you know, seeing these guys in army uniforms, everybody, hey, Batista, you know, I could see my dad, and my dad is like me, he's an idealist. So I could see how he felt for this stuff. And I know this is one of the most proudest things he ever did. When and his father let him go to this because his father was not going to let him, because by this time Ricardo knew it was communism, but told him, okay, son, I'll do this for you. I'll sign the paper. You can go. At age 13, my dad is, you know, going to the mountains in Camagüey to some village. You don't know what's going to happen to your kid. But when you read the books that they were teaching these campesinos, it's all about, oh, Fidel's the best and all this communist doctrination. It's not really, you could tell that the subject was very important, you know, and it was the first way to separate children from their parents and start molding them in the way of the revolution. It's the first separation, because as you see in my story, it's always about separating the family, keep them suspicious of each other, keep them apart. But my dad, he learned how to smoke during this time because he went out there and the Wajitos are smoking cigarettes. But he did that campaign, and you know, so let's go here. Okay, so at that time in 63, males at 16 had to do 3 years of military service. My father had to do his 3 years. He actually was on radar. So he was probably one of those people looking at the American U-2s during that time of the 60s, in 64, because he told me that he would have these things, he would yell these codes. That's what his job was at 16 in the Army, which I kind of think, wow, a 16-year-old running radar, it's kind of weird. But Um, so around this time is when my family starts leaving in the 63 to 73 period. Most of the Capotes like Ricardo and stuff. So in 65, Fidel announces Cubans can immigrate, and he launched what's called the Camarioca boatlift. And it's actually the first boatlift we had, but only 3,000 people leave to Key West. Ricardo and the Capotes are planning to leave through there. But the thing was, my dad was doing military service, so they would never allow him to leave. So my family could not leave because of my dad's forced military service. And my dad did not want to leave. My dad was a communist. He was building a country. He supported everything. My grandmother, Delia, was also a supporter of the revolution at that time. His mother also. She was the other communist in the Capote side that I know of. So in 1965 is when Cuba starts what's called UMAP. And UMAP were forced labor camps. And what basically was happening during that time is they were picking up anybody that looked Western. So if you look like the Beatles, you have pointed tight pants or long hair or any kind of hippie-ish, or if you're a religious kid, especially Jehovah's Witnesses, if you're anti-revolutionary, if you were anything, any of those categories, they would start, the two big, what they call recogidos, means they picked up people, because they would do is they would just pick people off the street and throw them in trucks and take them to these camps. This was in 65 through 66, where they picked up most of the people. My father was picked up in November 1965. How did this happen to my father? Okay, because the family wanted to leave in the boats in Cana. So my dad is in doing the military service in the radar, and his mother says, I'll talk to the head office guy that we want to leave the country and we want to take you. He goes, don't do that. You're gonna get me in trouble. Please don't do that. She goes, no, it'll be fine. I'll talk to him. We'll get your passport. We'll get out. My dad didn't want to leave either, but he's like, no, you're gonna get me in trouble. So what happens? She tells him, my dad gets sent to UMAP prisons because he wanted to leave the country. So he was picked up in November 1965. He was 16 years old. In 1967, he finally gets out of the prison of UMAP, and I'll give more details about it because there's more details to discuss about his time in prison. And then at that time, Ricardo, his father, my grandfather, exiles to Miami. So my dad sees his father for the last time at age 19. Again, family separation, forcing families to break apart and never see each other again. So in 1968, after my dad got out of UMAP, which, as much as the suffering that I'll explain to you later he goes through, it's the way it's led to my mother. So sometimes in life, to be tragedies, we find better things. But they meet in Havana because my father had left Camagüey, and the whole area that I'll show you, the area where he was imprisoned and where they had the camps, and I have a map of all the camps they had at that time. But him and my mom meet in Havana. And they meet there in 1968. And in 1968 also, they start doing away with small businesses in Cuba. And I'm going to show you how the small businesses that my families had were taken away. A lot of people talk about, oh, America this, but people always forget Cubans that own businesses. And I'm not talking about, Cuban who own $1 million. No, it's just small business, a bodega, a pharmacy, nothing big. But all those things are confiscated in 1968. In 1971, my parents get married. I am also going to talk about my uncle, great uncle, Hector Capote, who was released from prison in 1971. He had been arrested around 63 or something. I don't know the exact date, but his story is horrific also of what he suffered in jail. And then in 1972 and 73, was 72, Ricardo dies in Miami. And then I am born in 1973 in Cuba, in Havana. So after my uncle, George Capote, had escaped Cuba through Guantanamo, the second ones to leave were my aunt, Hilda Capote, and her sister, Thelma. This is right. This is my tia, Hilda. And the way they escaped was because when they had the Bay of Pigs, remember I said they were exchanging the medicine and stuff for the people that actually invaded the country. Well, a lot of families got to get out. I don't know, but I know a lot of my family have had connections and make things happen. Somehow they got themselves in there and they got out. So they had left on a boat. They had about 1,204 refugees, and they got to Miami. Most of my family, when they first immigrated to the United States, were immigrating towards New York. And then eventually the family in the United States came down to Miami, where we, in the 70s, were, and then all the Capotes and all my family all lived in Miami. But New York was actually the first stop of my family when they started immigrating after the revolution. This is just some pictures to give you an idea of Cana and some of the boats that were leaving at that time in 1965. This is where Ricardo and his wife wanted to leave with their 2 kids. And this is what got my dad in trouble because, again, she went and told the head guy. I actually did find the name and a picture of the guy who caused my dad to go to jail. I keep it on my computer. He recently died of old age. He never paid for his crimes, but I've always wanted to see what he looked like. So yeah, so there's just gives you some information again about 3,000 refugees and all that. Now these again are the freedom fights. This is how Ricardo left Cuba in 1967. Freedom flights were that after the boat lift, they made an agreement, Cuba, United States, and it lasted from 1965 to 73. Everybody was leaving toward Varadero, which is on the East Coast by the beaches, is a tourist area, in Matanzas, and over 700,000 Cuban refugees left through that route. So that was the way that the Ricardo Capote came to the United States and to Miami. And it became the largest and longest refugee resettlement initiative in the history of the United States. And that's actually a picture from one of the airplanes. Here I have pictures of the prison camps or forced labor camps of UMAP. So there was an estimate that about 35,000 inmates, and this mostly happened in the Camagüey region. I'll show you a map later. And the estimates are that about 500 people ended up in psychiatric wards, 70 died from torture, and 180 committed suicide. My dad would tell me stories, especially that they were horrible to the Jehovah's Witnesses. They told me of all the religious groups, them and the Seventh-day Evangelists, where he says they would put them in barrels and close it and fill it up with water and leave them out there in the hot sun. He says that they used to take him to fake executions. He's 16 years old at this time, and this is what he's saying. So, they take you outside, blindfold you, you think you're going to die, and then they take you back inside, the beatings. My dad got a beating of his own. He spoke up at 16. One of the guards broke all his front teeth, all 4 of them. They never took him to get medical care. So my dad eventually had to get fake teeth in the front. This here is a picture of, so you get an idea what my dad slept on. Those floors are just dirt. Those are pieces of wood that you put a hammock. So, just a hammock and a string, and that's how you sleep. You would wake up at 5 a.m. You would work in the fields up to sundown, and at nighttime you get 2 hours of communist indoctrination. I'm sorry, I'm a union guy. If I got to work from dusk to dawn, I got to hear, and I don't care what ideology you are. I don't want to hear you. Shut up. You couldn't pay me enough. So these were forced labor camps that lasted from 65 to 67. What really, because people don't tend to forget, a lot of people have these fantasies about Cuba because, again, the revolution promised so much. And I agree. My family supported, Castro spoke democratically. And then like in 61 was oh, I'm not. And then people started disappearing, people that challenged him, everybody started fleeing. I mean, all this, if you cannot see any of that and see that, because people like to say, oh, people that fled were the Batista supporters. No. Yeah, some of those fled in 59. They had to get out. They're going to get killed. But people from the left, the social democrats, the president of the Authenticos, who was a social democrat, anti-communist, gave money to Fidel Castro and supported his campaign, you know. But anyway, my father spent those 2 years, and you know, one thing that really bothered me, because I used to make fun of my dad's hands and feet, because his hands and feet were all green and like gross. I've never seen a human being grosser, but I was so ignorant. I didn't realize it was just because of this. Working in the camps with like terrible shoes, sometimes barefoot, his feet were all like in horrible condition. My mom told me that when they met, he was really embarrassed to show his feet or his hands. He was always like, you know, because all the hard work he had to do those 2 years. So in the right, you get an idea. Those are some of the buildings. They used to put barbed wires. They would get family visits, depending, you know, if they were behaving right. If no, their family visits would be denied and things like that. My family, my grandmother and my aunt would go visit him and bring him food. You know, at this time, Cuba in the dark, you got to consider Cuba like a North Korea in the sense of darkness, where the outside world doesn't know what's going on. I mean it in that sense. A country that's shut down, especially after the revolution. Cuba shut itself down. There was no free press. The press was taken over in 1960. So there was not a lot of information leaking out. And the only reason that these camps were discovered was because a reporter had somehow, because reporters, first of all, during that time could not get out of Havana, or they had to go with an escort, which is like in North Korea right now, if a reporter goes. This guy somehow was able to go in the countryside, went to Camagüey, and discovered an interview and took all these pictures. He was kicked out of the country. His name was Billy Kidd, if I remember correctly. But he was kicked out of the country once he's published this article, and then Cuba started facing international pressure to end these camps. You know, here I show you, these are all the camps where they were at that time. Their names. My father was in this one right here. And as you can see, this is the Camagüey area. So they're mostly in that general area, in that part of the country. And this shows you some pictures. Now, a lot too, what, because there was some stuff in the press, what Cuba would do is, my dad told me about this, when the Cuban press come, they would give them clean uniforms and all this, and they would come in from the press and like be smiling, like, oh, we're at day camp. This is so happy. And but then when the cameras or the official would leave, it would be the rags, the beatings back. So a lot of facade for, because there was some stuff about it in the Cuban press. So this is one of the pictures that you would see in the Cuban press. So that's why everybody looks clean and happy at the camp. So the guy named Kidd estimated there are about 200 such camps, and they worked about 60 hours a week for about 7 pesos a month. And this was a picture from someone's memories about, you know, the guard, how they had guards on the top of the towers watching them and things like that. Usually there was about, if I remember correctly, about 20 guards per camp. So here I go back to 1968 when they take away all the businesses. This is a picture of my maternal, on my mom's side, my great-grandparents who came from Spain in 1933. So they started building their family in Havana. You know, they actually owned a couple of bodegas, like 2 or 3. And small bodegas, not big, and they owned 2 or 3 homes. But in 1968, their grocery stores were taken away from them. And there I give you some of the stats of the businesses they were taken away from Cubans. You know, and to me, you know, because people talk about, oh yeah, you know, the shell, the industry is big. I understand that part, but these are people that were immigrants to a brand new country, fought hard, successful. What's the evil in that? What's the evil in that? You know, I mean, you think they came in here? I mean, they were washing floors, all kinds of stuff, and they get to this and you take it all away from them, you know? This is my great uncle, Hector Capote. Well, no, that's not a picture of him. I apologize. It's just a picture, like, give an idea what a pharmacist looked at that time. But he actually owned a pharmacy and was a pharmacist in Santa Clara. He had his business taken away too, a small pharmacy. This is when in 68, when all the small businesses, this is after all the big industries were taken away and nationalized. But in 68, they started taking away all the small businesses. This is Raul Capote. he had a doctor's office in Veriente. They took his doctor's office. He actually wind up later. I actually met somebody that that he treated and saved their life back in the 50s or something. I had a conversation with him in Facebook. It was really cool. I posted something in a group and they're like, yeah, your doctor saved my mom's life. Your great uncle or something. It was really cool. So I also had some great uncles that just had fincas, farms. I don't know sizes or anything. From my understanding, they were small. But Rafael Capote, and this is Jose Manuel Capote. They had farms. Just to give you an idea of the background of my family, because people like to say, oh, you know, these Cubans that come here, they're all from rich families and Baptista. No, I'm showing you the makeup of just any Cuban family, how dynamic we are and the things that happens to us. Now, there was a communist in my family, and he is on the paternal side. He is one of the brothers of my grandmother, Roberto Pino. He was born in 1909. He belonged to the Communist Party in the 1940s and 30s, when it was not cool to be, you know what I'm saying, card-carrying communist, especially in the 40s, like I was talking about it. The anti-communism feeling was really high. He had his own store where he fixed tires and stuff. But guess what? They took it away from him. And my family told me, he's like, this is worth garbage. He went from communist to anti-communist when he started seeing what was happening with Cuba, and they took his business and things like that. But, you know, I call him the true communist because not the 1959 communist, but the actual true one is him. And this is on my grandmother's side, Ada Pino, that's her picture. I think that's a picture with my dad, the small one there. And then she owned a salon in Holguin, Cuba with my other great aunt. These are my two great aunts, Gladys. They also lost that after 1968, the small salon. Now, this is probably the most horrific story. You know, my dad's time in prison is 1.5 years, and it was terrible, but Hector Capote, what he suffered, in 1963, around after the revolution, as soon as people were finding out that Castro was not democratic, there was going to be no elections, he was controlling everything, people started rebelling and started going to the mountains in Escambray. So since a lot of my families had small farms and fincas, Hector Capote had a small farm. He was helping the anti-communist rebels in the mountains of Escambray by letting them hide their weapons, giving them food. They discovered that. They put him in jail around 63, 64. Now, I don't have a picture of him. I just know his story from, and also there's a movie that was made about it. If you look to your, to over here, this was made in 2001. I always heard this story, but I didn't put one on one together. Like my family told me, oh, you had a grandfather in jail in his underwear. And I'm like, what does that mean? You know, like he's hanging out in his underwear. But when I saw this movie and then I looked back at the stories and everything, everything they told me was like, wow, what they told me is this movie. And it's called Plantados. It's by this director called Lilo Villapalana, which is down there. And these are some of the pictures that I put on there. So what happened with them is because in Cuba, the common prisoners, they made them to wear one color, and then political prisoners wore another color. So these Cubans were like, we're political prisoners because these are the people that were being put in jail during that time because they were revolting against Castro. This is no longer Batista. Batista people are gone. They've been shot. You know, this is already 64. These are people that are rebelling in the Escambray Mountains. This is what the Bay of Pigs thought they were going to hook up with, but it never happened. So he gets put in a jail in Santiago. He was supposed to do 20 years. Now, when you see this movie, there is one torture that I was told on the family. Then I saw in this movie, they put you in a cell that's called the gabineta, which means filing cabinet. So it's about this wide where you can all you can do is like this, and then you're like this. You're facing this way and you're standing up the whole time, and you pee, you poop, and you're standing up the whole time. And they kept you for weeks and weeks in the gabinetas. And you'd be piled up, a row of you on top of each other. And he says, man, I mean, when you see this movie, what Cubans that went against Castro, the way they were brutalized, another thing they would do to them, they would take them to these lakes where was the poop, from the prison, and they would throw them in there. And they made them stay in there in human feces and stuff like that as a punishment. I mean, just besides the beatings and the killings that were going on, and these special group of prisoners that my great uncle Arturo's part of was the ones that refused to wear the uniforms of the common prisoners. Said, no, we're political prisoners. They suffer the worst, because if you accepted their indoctrination, you did what they told you, they would give you more visits, maybe lengthen your years. But if you resisted, you paid more of a heavy price. When my dad finally met him in 1971, he said that he looked like he had aged 30 years and was skinny and just looked so decrepit. They had to buy him clothes because he met him after he got married. After my dad got married, he got news that Arturo was released from prison. So he was in Havana, so he went to Camagüey to meet him. And he said he was in horrible condition of just, and when you see this movie and what they do to the people, it's just, all because they think different. Just are thinking different, not agreeing with one person. But it's an incredible story. And Huber Matos that I told you a little bit about, he was a plantado. And my dad, even though he was a communist at that time, was bizarre. He was proud of his uncle, Arturo. He would tell everybody. But my dad still believed in communism, because when my dad was in UMAP, even though they beat him and all that, he still forgave them. The sergeant that let him out told him, oh, we made a mistake because you're a good young communist. And my dad told me when I talked to him, he said, I forgave him, son. I believed in communism so much, I forgave him. But then he was also proud of his uncle who fought these communists as a plantao and spent many years in his underwear and beatings and all these kind of punishments. So that, to me, he suffered a lot, but I'm glad this movie is out there to tell the truth, because very few people know about this story in Cuba or know about these people. Here on my mom's side, Augustina and Landolino, I don't know much about them. This is certainly a story of Gamboa, and that was a rich part of the family. When supposedly my mom tells me they even had someone that helped them clean the house and stuff like that. So I'm like, they must have been had some kind of middle class or something. I don't really have any stories with them of anything. I mean, they weren't rich or anything. They lived in Santiago. But they make up the person that I am. I wanted to show you guys this because this is one of the cool things of Cuba. When I was a little kid, my dad would make me these. They're called chimichangas, and all you do is you put some piece of wood and some tires, and this is what we did in the 70s in Cuba, and have races. So when I was a kid in Cuba, we would have these races with chimichangas, and my dad would build the best one in the neighborhood. So all the kids would ask him to build one, but he would never do it for them. He said, no, I'm not going to build you one. I'm building only for Hector. This to us is like a national sport. All right. So now we're going to 1974, and my dad's mom dies of cancer in 1973 in Cuba. And my two brothers are born. And at this time in Cuba starts the Angola War. And Cuba is sending over 56,000 soldiers eventually from 1975 to 1988. So this is something that's scaring a lot of Cuban parents like mine at this time, when we're young kids, that Cuba is entering a war in Africa and a lot of people are being sent. I think something here that's huge is in 1979, for the first time, Cuban Americans are allowed to visit family in Cuba. And the importance of this is because we start going back, and my uncle George, he went back. They start telling him stories of the success they're having in America, because Cubans were successful in America. And then Cubans in Cuba in that time in the 70s, the economy was stagnant. They weren't doing particularly well. You had the energy crisis, we all know, at that time that affected the whole world. So, they're exchanging ideas. And for the first time, they're seeing their family in Miami, which for a long time they were told they're starving, they're not doing good, it's better here. And that time, there's no phone calls is the only communication, and phone calls were very short because they were so expensive, So this is the first time there's interaction, and more than 100,000 Cubans visit in 1979. Now, in March 8th, 1980, this is already starting now the Mariel events that lead to us leaving the United States. Castro, reacting to recent hijackings in 1980 that started happening, there was a lot of Cubans wanting to get out by taking airplanes, by taking boats, by taking whatever they can get, by weapons, a lot of stuff. So he said the possibility of a mass immigration leaving Cuba on March 8th. Then the day that I think will, in my mind, live forever is April 1st, 1980. That's when 6 Cubans, they were seeking asylum, hijacked a bus and crashed through the gates of the Peruvian embassy in Havana. One guard was killed because they were shooting between each other. The Cubans had no weapons. Cubans have not been allowed to have guns since the revolution. So it's very unlikely for a Cuban to be able to get a gun. But they crashed the Peruvian embassy. And this is big because Cubans have tried to leave before, and a lot of these embassies were sending them back. So this is the first embassy where they were able to find any kind of shelter, politically and otherwise. So on April 4th, Peru extends asylum to the gate crashers. And then Cuba decides to remove the embassy guards. Havana announces that the embassy is open. At this time, my dad is being sent to the embassy as one of those people to look. My dad did not work like for the security or anything like. He worked at a university, but you always worked for the government at whatever they needed you to do. So him and many people at work were sent to keep an eye on what was happening in the embassy. And he was noticing what was happening, the beatings, how we were treating people. And at this time, my dad would go home and start like having doubts about his ideology. He, for the first time, started questioning his belief in the Cuban Revolution after for many years, believing in it. So then in April 6th, all hell breaks loose in Havana, and 10,856 Cubans crowd onto the embassy floor, and Peru grants them asylum. Now, on April 19th, an estimated 1 million Cubans marched past the U.S. intersection. My dad was part of that. He was part. They told his people at his job to go to that, because one thing that people, I think in America, have never understood is that you're required to go to these things, right? Your job. The volunteer work, you're required. Does anybody really want to work volunteer? Come on, those things are required, because then you don't, you could possibly lose your job. You could be disciplined. The union is pushing you to do it too, because the union is supporting the government, not your right as a worker. Union's telling you, hey, your quota is not good this month. And trust me, I've had this conversation with friends that have been in unions in Cuba during the revolution. So it's an estimate about 1 million Cubans marched past the embassy. And it's if you look at the video from that time, it was really menacing and scary. All the stuff that was going on. And my dad was there. He was part of that crowd screaming. And then in Miami at the same time, the first exile readies a flotilla of 42 boats to start bringing back refugees. So the Mariel boatlift is starting to get his legs, because people in the embassy stayed there for quite a long time. The Cuban government offered them to go home and made all these promises, but people do not trust the government. So a lot of them stayed there. And let me see here. One thing that I just wanted to throw out there that me and my brother suffered when we were in Cuba was this illness called Pertussis disease. I didn't know this disease to a couple of years later. I know the problem that we had, but I suffered that through Cuba. It's just to show you something, a little quick something about their healthcare. I got the best surgeon in Cuba to do the surgery to correct what you see there, which is the problem with people that suffer from that. When we came to the United States, Jackson Memorial Hospital, United States, did a study on us because we had one of our great uncles who suffered from this, skipped generations, and it was kind of like a medical oddity. So they did all these studies and stuff when we came to the United States, which as a kid, which are pretty cool. But anyway, one of the best surgeons in Cuba did my surgery. And why is that? Because when I tell you about my grandfather in Cuba, he had all the connections to get me the best surgeon in the United States. If you read about this guy, Rodrigo Alvarez, he's the one who created this hospital after the revolution, Frank Pais. Yeah, he performed surgery on me. But the crazy thing is that if I would have been in the United States, they don't do a surgery. They just put a device on you that fixes it, which is a lot better than what I went through as a kid, that I practically couldn't walk for a whole year. I was on a body cast for 6 months in Cuba, and I used crutches for another 6 months. I had the best surgeon, thank God. But if I was in the United States, I would have had that brace that my brothers had instead of this operation. Here's some pictures of us from 1975 to 78. This is my dad right here. This is my two twin brothers, and that's me. I think this is my grandparents' house. This is my dad and me, where I show you where we lived at that time, which is by the university in Havana. And again, my grandmother's house is my grandmother here. My brother is me, my mom. I don't have a lot of pictures because they're mostly in my mom's house. So this book explained to me how this whole thing in Mariel became a possibility, because this is about the discussions to allow Cubans to go back to Cuba and visit their families, which they weren't allowed to. And this is when it whole started, that whole interaction, which I think led to Mariel, because when Cubans started seeing, oh my God, we're living in this misery. You live like this in the United States, we want out. So this book called Secret Missions to Cuba, and this gentleman, Bernard Benes, which was a Jewish Cuban, was the one that led the negotiations, and they let out a lot of political prisoners at that time also. So it's a cool book that explains to me a lot of the story. Now, this is the guy who led the bus, and I'm so grateful to him, who crashed in the embassy. And his name is Hector. Can you believe that? I mean, I was like, the world is a small place. He was in the army, but he's the one that drove the bus to the embassy to start the whole Mariel and the whole Peruvian embassy thing. And here are some pictures from the embassy that day. So 6 or 12 people crashed the bus. They removed the guards, and over 7,000 people stormed the embassy. My dad was thinking about, because again, he started seeing so much abuse at that time. He would go home and tell my mom, you know, I don't like what I'm seeing. She said he would put his head down in a corner and like, you know, I can't take what's going on. And he talked to his boss in the university, you know, where they were sending him to guard in the embassy and stuff. And he told them, boss, you know, the things that I'm seeing. And the boss told him, hey, Capote, shut up, keep your blinders on, you know, just do what you got to do. And what was my dad seeing? Because one thing they would do to the people in the embassy is, you know, there's like 7,000 people there. They would grab 500 boxes of ration and throw it at them. If you have people who've been there and they're hungry, what's going to happen? And they take pictures to show, oh, these are savages. These are the lower class. These are the scum of our society. Look how they fight like animals. They're not humans. Okay, the people have been there for 4 days. They got children, you know, and they're starving. And you throw 500 pieces of food like we're farm animals. And then you take pictures to show in your national propaganda papers. So stuff like that was happening. And these are the books that showed me all that. This book is remarkable. He was in the embassy, although he was there for like 4 months. He was one of the last ones to leave because he didn't trust the government. And he tells the whole story. It's called Days of the Embassy. It's in English. It's a great book. He eventually immigrates out of Cuba. And then this one gives you an idea of all the things that were going on in Cuba and the crisis in 1980, the Peruvian embassy, Havana on Edge. Two great books that again explain me the sacrifice that people made to get me here. And again, this is a conversation my dad had with his boss, and you know, his dad, all the things he was seeing, they were making people fight for food. They were beating people. They would the Secret Service, Cuban Secret Service would go in there and pretend to be part of the whole crowd and instigate things. My dad saw all that stuff. So one of the big things that's really damaged Cuba, and it's part of my story, is the Committees for the Defense of Revolution. There's their logo. There's some pictures of them doing activities. This is during Mariel. So after the revolution, one of the things that Castro created was that in every neighborhood, you had a person who was in charge and they hold meetings, and you basically are looking at your neighbors. So let's say I see a strange car at Peter's house and I'm like, I don't know that car. Why is that car doing there? I'm going to report that. Next day, I see the same car, but I see, yesterday I saw it at 6, but now I see it at 4. That's strange. Anything, Peter coming with a person, I can use anybody, any one of my friends coming. You keep tabs and then you report things and, I see unrevolutionary behavior and they give you prizes for telling on your neighbors. This is, again, why Cuban society and families in Cuba are so destroyed, because nobody trusts anybody. Because for so years, we were taught to snitch and to tell on each other. And people have gone to jail. People have suffered because of it. Oops. So in the time of Mariel, what would happen is if they found out that a family was going to leave like mine to Mariel, they would gather the head of the CDR and they would gather your neighbors and they would scream, throw stuff at you. They're called acts of repudiation. Some of these left to people being killed. Some of these people getting hurt. I'll tell you one story about my father. There was a guy that they were chasing 300 people. The guy was running. He jumps at my dad. He tells him, they're going to kill me. They're going to kill me. He goes, nothing's going to happen, man. Nothing's happening. He's like, he goes, please kill me. Don't let them get to me. It was like a huge ass crowd. And my dad grabs from the ground a pipe, because there was all kinds of stuff. At that time, Havana was hot. And he grabs a guy, and the people coming in, my dad goes, if anybody touches and comes at us, you're going to die along with us. You leave him alone. All right. All he told us to do is leave. All right. Leave him alone. And he actually saved this guy's life. And the guy hugged him and said, hey, my dad said, hey, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm nobody special. But again, those are the things that my dad saw. And he was a communist and believed in building a better country. But when he saw that he had to hurt, or people were like hurting each other for what they believe in, it was just too much. It was just too much. And these committees have, were really horrible in the 80s, all the things they did to families like mine. And I'll give the specifics of what happened to when we left Cuba. So in Cuba, we've always faced outside forces. We've never turned against each other. But by the 1980s, it was like the country was almost in a civil war of neighbor against neighbor. People are more afraid than ever of each other. And in one of his speeches from Fidel, and I'll tell you, because I translate in English, and I thought these words are so important, describing people like me and my family. He says, and the gusanos, which is the worms, that's what they used to call us, gusanos, and the privileged, the parasites, and the sons of parasites, that would be me, that want to abandon the flag and create crime and treason against our homeland. That's a part of his speech. And then from his other speech, which is called El que no tenga sangre revolucionaria, whoever does not have revolution in their blood, whoever does not have revolution in their genes, whoever does not have revolution in their blood, that does not have the mind to adapt to a revolution, who does not have a heart that can adapt to the effort and heroism of a revolution, we do not want them. We do not need them. This is what he told his people who disagree with him, who just disagree with him. That's why I've made controversial statements with my friends that, take away ideology, which I don't think Castro ever had an ideology, just wanted power. Trump never had an ideology, just wanted power. People with egos and power, that's what I see them as, both from the same card from different perspectives. One day in 1980, this day we were at the balcony with my dad, and I saw an act of violence. They were beating a man unconscious, and I asked my dad. At this time, I was 7 years old. Why are they doing that to that man? And my dad told me, son, he wants to leave Cuba. And me being only 7, I told him, so someone wants to leave Cuba, then do that to him? And my dad says, I can't answer your question, but one day I would answer it. In Cuba, they teach children not to talk, outside the walls, to be quiet. Nobody talks about what their religion is. Nobody talks outside the walls bad about the revolution, not even for their children, especially, not now, so like in these times, but in these times, that's what Cuba was like. That's why I always think of Cuba in black and white in 1980s. Most of my family pictures are in black and white, but I remember such a I look at the society like that we were in this dark gray, supposed utopia, but we were just like, we were lifeless, and we were families being destroyed, and to me, it was a great revolution. That's the colors of that. So in 1980, April 20th, Castro announces he opened the port of Mariel for exiles to pick up relatives who want to leave the island. So my uncle George, he's the one that's going to do it. He's going to pick us up. And then May 2nd, Cubans seeking their visas on the U.S. interest section were beaten by a Castro crowd, and it was about 400 people. There's a video of that. Remember, this is 1980. There's no cell phones. Having a camera of any kind of, only the government has that kind of money. But somebody was filming from a hotel room and actually got video of this. It's available online, of the beating they gave these people just looking for a visa. And just to explain you again, these CDRs in a different way, the people that came to beat up these people that are the U.S. interest section were bussed in from the government, because what they do is they pick up people. They bust them in. It's not like citizens that say, hey, I'm just going to come in. Hey, I believe in this. No, they actually prepare this stuff. They bust them in. They give them these sticks, and they start beating on these people with sticks in front of the U.S. interest section, trying to get visas to get out in 1980. And that's one of the biggest videos that have come out that you can see on the internet from that time. Jimmy Carter, which I'm always grateful for, says, we'll continue to provide an open heart, open arms to refugees seeking freedom from communist domination. And a lot of Cubans took that, get your family. And this was on May 5th. May 16, the Coast Guard starts a naval blockade. And there's pictures of it. People, don't forget this happened in Mariel, where there was a naval blockade. So in May 17th, just to show you how dangerous this time was getting when people were starting to leave, there was this boat, the Oloyomi, which sank and killed 14 people. So the people estimate about 25 people died, possible, but it's, again, in all kinds of vessels. And I'll tell you what happened in my vessel. It's hard to tell exactly how many Cubans lost their lives at sea. In July 1980, that was the first time that we tried to leave, because my family and my mom and dad, we tried to leave twice. And in July was the first time when they came with a giant shrimping boat to pick us up. But at that time, you could only pick up one family at a time. And my uncle could only then pick up his wife's family and couldn't pick us up, but he promised to come back for us. At that time, my dad had decided to leave already by July, because remember, the embassy happened in April, and he had seen enough that he had phone conversations with my uncle and was, I got to get out of here. He was really afraid. He had a conversation with my mom that told her, my mom's name is Ada. He goes, Ada, what do we do if our kids jump on the ocean to escape, if they wind up in jail because they don't agree? I couldn't stand to have my child suffer through any of those things, or, they kill him. He goes, we have to get him out. We have to get him out of the country. We can't let him. We don't want him to go to Africa. We don't want him to, we don't know what they're going to grow up. They're young, but this place, there's no future, and my dad had a lot of his family here. Like I've shown you, my mom had no family here in the United States. My mom's side had mostly a state in Cuba. So in August 2nd, we leave Cuba. So, there's a picture of the apartments where we lived. We lived right here on the second floor. There's actually a picture of it. These were apartments that my dad built. My dad belonged to, you see a picture here on this side on the right, the Communist Brigade's construction. My dad belonged to that. Basically, they make you do construction and then they promise you an apartment. What happened to my dad is they were like, yeah, make an apartment building, help make it, and we'll give you that apartment. By the fifth one, they finally gave it to him. They kept lying to him and lying to him and lying to him. He was getting angry and complaining to this. And finally, they gave him an apartment building. It was a small apartment, 2 bedrooms, small kitchen, and that balcony. We moved there in 1974, and there's the middle of it. Honestly, when I have seen it in person, and I have never seen a uglier, scarier. Wow, the conditions that building is in, and when I looked that could have been my future, I and I've been to plenty of places in the United States, and I just never seen a place when an apartment building looks so run down. This is where my dad worked at the university, which was Jose Antonio Echeverria, where it was a science university. He worked in the factory. And these are my grandparents on my mom's side, Jose Figueras and Santiago and Sylvia. My grandfather here, Jose, actually, he, during the time of Batista, I didn't tell you this story, he was, from my stories I've heard, was transporting weapons in Havana in his car, and his family was worried about him because, he was getting himself involved in the anti-Batista movement. They sent him to the United States, and he actually spent the first 2 years of revolution in the University of Ohio, working on his master's degree. He's the one that is a scientist, and I will give more details about him. But yeah, they send him away, and he married my grandmother Santiago, and there's a picture of them one of our visits in the United States later on in life. They married in '62, and they're from this neighborhood, which is by Havana, Fontenard, which was discovered in '57. And here's all the prizes that who I just introduced you to, Jose Figueras, has won. One medal that is very prestigious that I read about was the Jose Finlay Award, which is the highest award that a Cuban can win. And this is all, during the times of the revolution. Carlos Finlay was the one that discovered that mosquitoes transmit yellow fever. So he's considered a national hero in Cuba, and it's the highest scientific award, and he won it. Plus all these medals you see here. He never left Cuba. When I get into more of the details, I'll tell what happened in Mariel with my grandfather. But he is somebody very important in Cuba, and he gained a doctor's degree from University of Havana in 1979. Even though he didn't want to leave, he could not leave because someone like him would be thrown in jail because they weren't letting professionals leave Cuba in 1980. You had to be middle class or lower class. You could not be a professional. So they would have never allowed it anyway. Here on the right, you see a still that I took from the video I told you about the embassy, where the people are going to the intersection, get visas to get to the United States. And that's just some pictures of the people from the CDR beating on the Cubans that are trying to get out. You can see the whole video there. And this, I'll explain the first time that we wanted to leave Cuba. My parents didn't tell anybody they were leaving because, again, you don't trust anybody. So they spoke about it very quietly between each other. The only one that knew was my uncle in the United States who was going to pick us up. So in July, he was going to come get us, couldn't because of the you only take one family. So now in August, he comes to get us. So back then, when the families, when people found out again that you were leaving, they would do all these acts of repudiation against you. So when the military police came to pick us up, the CDR head person in the neighborhood saw it and called all the neighbors together. So the police come up there. I am 7 years old. My two twin brothers are 5. My little brother's 9 months. And I got my 2 parents. My mom's 27. My dad's like 32. So they come to bring us down to the taxi. So we're going to the taxi. And at that time, I had 2 best friends that lived upstairs. They were 2 twins. So there was the mother of the 2 twins and some other of the neighbors screaming, "You're going to starve to death in the United States, traitors to the revolution." My dad is carrying me and is carrying my brother. He has by the hand my brother Jose. My mom has the baby, 9 months, and my brother Ernie. So someone, I don't know who, pushes my dad while he's holding the 2 kids. And the lady who's the mother of my best friends tells her kid, "Pick up a rock and throw it at Hector." This is the mother of my best friend's telling her freaking kid is my best friend to throw a rock at my head. My dad turns around and says, "You hit my kid with a rock, I'm going to grab yours by the leg and hit him against the building till he stops breathing." This is how tense it was the first time that we left the apartment building. It was just the crowd just screaming stuff, and I don't know what's going on. I have no idea. So we get into the taxi. We drive to this place. I'll show you a picture of Abre Fontaine, which is where they're processing passports and things like that. We get there and there's a problem. My little brother, 9 months, there's no passport, there's no record of him. So the guy at the place tells my dad, well, you can go and leave him. And my dad goes, oh, so I'm going to leave the 9-month-old to cook for himself, to drive himself back to the house. It's like just stupid questions. And then we talked to our uncle to fix the paperwork because my little brother's not on there. That picture that you see up there is my picture that day. I know myself. I can see myself. I'm scared. And I have the same look when I get scared, that you can tell that the whole day was just super scared what was going on. I had no idea. These people are screaming at me, telling to hit me. All because we just wanted to leave and go somewhere else. And on my passport, later when you leave the country, they do this to you. They stamp an E, which means escoria. Escoria is a code word for scum. That's what they called a lot of us, all of us that were leaving to Mariel, scum. So after we had this moment, we went to my grandfather's house, the one that I said was the scientist, had won all the awards, Jose. We get there, and this is one of the difficult stories and things of life, but you forgive people. He tells my dad, you can't be here. If they see you, and here's my dad with, the baby, the three of us, we just had this event, we're scared. And he said, all right, no, you can't, you got to go back home. So my dad took us back home, and you know what? I don't blame my grandfather, because he was a professional. He was probably being looked at. It would have cost him something, and he was scared. And maybe I would have been scared in that position. It's easy for me here to sit where I am and say, oh, I would have done the right thing. He didn't mean any harm. It didn't cause any harm, but it's one of those things that when people ask, like, oh, why does someone do this and to someone they love? And it's just one of those things of life, when his family needed him to accept him inside, he was too afraid. So we went back to the apartment and we had to wait. So we waited for 5 days inside that apartment. I show you that picture. They were throwing eggs. They were throwing potatoes at us, which my dad would tell them, 2 years from now, you'll be dying for these potatoes, which is true, though. All the food crisis as Cuba goes, and these people are throwing potatoes at us. They wrote whore on the door of the house. In the middle of the night, they would bang the doors. I mean, those 5 days were just horrible. And we were, the doors, blinds, everything closed. I mean, complete darkness for 5 days waiting while all kinds of things outside were happening. This is the place that I told you about where they processed the passport. So finally, we got the paperwork for and this is a picture before my little brother. It's probably like 78 or 77. So we finally got our passports for everybody. This time, when they picked us up, they went through the back, and nobody in the neighborhood found out we were leaving. So we didn't have any big scene this time, thank God. So then we go to this same place again. They give us the passport. They got one from my brother. This is the last place I saw my father in 1980. So, I'm sorry. So we get there, and the guy that saw us last time that saw my dad and the whole problem, my little brother that didn't have a passport, was like, hey, saw my dad and say, that one had a problem. Hey, you gotta check him out. He has a problem. So my uncle never said where my dad worked, that he worked at the university, because of course that could bring him problems, even though my dad was not doing any, just working like a factory. I mean, he didn't have it. He was a factory worker. He's a high school student and just a regular worker. But because of where he worked, they were making a big fuss when we were there. So then he starts talking to the guy, and then actually one of the guys that walked into the conversation is a famous person in Cuban history called Tony de la Guardia, who was in the military. He later, along with Ochoa, were accused of drug dealing in 1988, and they were executed by the Cuban government. But a lot of people are saying that the real ones behind it were Castro. Well, this person later, it was always big in Cuban history, was actually in that same room with my dad, and he was like, oh, I'm gonna go talk to somebody, and the guy never came back. And then my dad was starting to worry, and then they asked him a question that, you know, what do you want to leave? You're being a traitor to the revolution. And, you know, and my dad told him, aren't you the ones that are traitors to the revolution? You know, all we want to do is leave. All we want, if we don't think different. And my dad spoke out for the first time, and they punished him. He came out. He told us they're not letting me leave. All of us, I had cleared that building. All of us were allowed to leave. I was 7 years old. He told me, Hector, you're now the man of the house. You got to take care of your mom and dad. You know, I was 7. I didn't understand still what was going on. I just been through all this stuff, and I was like, why is he telling me this? So after my mom was crying, obviously, and she was hugging my dad, and then they wanted to separate us into 2 cars, and my mom said, no, you know, after this experience, like, how are we going to be separated? No way, we're staying together. And we were lucky because my uncle George made some people had even worse experience than we did, of like family getting beat up, killed, you know, worse experiences. I think we had it better than some families that went through this thing. So we get there, and they take us to mosquito camp. Mosquito camp at that time had barbed wires. They were Cuban military with dogs. They were processing people. They took us to the medical place. And then at that time, they were telling us, we were like an infirmary. And remember I showed you had that leg problem. My 2 brothers had the leg problem also. And my brother Ernie had a cast. So the people are interviewing my mom. Oh, but you have no family in the United States. Why would you want to leave? You have nobody there. She goes, I have my husband's family. I don't need to say anything else. I need to talk to you. I have my husband's family. And they kept talking and insisting. Then they started talking to me and go, you know what? In the United States, you're not gonna go to school. You're not gonna have toys like here in Cuba. You're not gonna have your friends. It's really bad there. My mom would tell me, hey, Tico, look at me, look at me. She'd say, you know, to look at her, not look at the sky. Trying to convince me to stay. And he just kept insisting. It was terrible. And then, thank God we weren't there too long. And then we were finally, this is August 2nd, 1980. We got to the port where the boats were waiting for families. And there, my uncle George, my mom sees him, she only knows him from photographs. I've seen him in photographs, don't know him. And first thing he says is, I promise to get him out. I promise to get him out. And so the boat is named Chula, and we start boarding it. And then at that time, what was happening in Mariel, the Mariel exodus was very different than the other ones, because it was now the people that have gone through the communism school, have grown up in it. It wasn't, you know, the ones that experienced the other parts of Cuba. We were more mixed. We were more lower class, more working class, more poor. We're very different. But, you know, along with that, there was a percentage that is, as people say, it's around 8%. Castro cleaned the jails of people, not only not political, which that, okay, great, but people that were criminals, and also opened the door to people in mental institutions. So my uncle told me that he had to take people that he didn't know who the hell they were. One of them that I remember, that I think must have had some kind of psychosis or something, because he was just making weird faces and blinking through our ride. So we started leaving on August 2nd at night in 1980. And this is a boat, not ours, but, you know, just to give you an idea that's going through Mariel, to give you an idea. And we had a small boat just like that following us. And one of the crazy things that happened to us is that boat started sinking, and we had to take those people on. We were so overfilled that when the Coast Guard passed by, we would have to duck, because they would, I mean, it was a hazard. We just had way too many. And it was just like that boat. It was not it was one of these like yachts for pleasure. It wasn't, but Cuban families at that time didn't care. Anybody who had any kind of like, they could possibly make it, but so many broke down. So their boat behind us started sinking. So we had to take those people on. It's
Hector, this is Peter. Yeah. I'm sorry, but we're run out of time.
Oh, okay.
And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for how much you have shared with us. And I know how important it is to you. There have been several comments in the chat about how moving people have found your testimony. I'm sorry that we don't have more time, but maybe on another occasion we can pick up the story of how you become a union activist in the United States.
Yeah, because this is pretty much the ending of the land, because we landed August 3rd is the ending of it. And I mean, yeah, that's another part of my life.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I apologize it took so long, but I wanted to try to give people a feel for my country.
Sure.
And the things that we've gone through as a family and as just as people of a country.
And it's important to us that the Eastside Freedom Library be a place where people can tell their stories. So thank you for preparing this and putting so much together and sharing so much with us.
Thank you very much. So everybody, I apologize we didn't get to any questions. It was my fault for overrunning.
Well, it's history's fault. We know